We're good. Good morning, everyone. Um, I'm speaking, it's very weird because I'm speaking to a very empty room, and hopefully there are lots of you online, but I'll pretend that you're all here and I can see you. Um, so I'm Victoria Coleman, and I've got Toby Negrin here with me. Uh, we're gonna do our best to try and answer some of the questions that were left on the table during the Dev Summit Q&A that we did. And of course, any other questions that come up today during the discussion, we'll be more than happy to take those as well. Um, while it's lonely here, I know we have an active IRC line going, so we'll get started by answering the top 4 questions that emerged on the list since January. But feel free to use IRC to interject um, or ask questions outside the 4. So looking at these 4, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Victoria. Just a quick note. We can't talk about the Turkey situation on advice of our communications and legal team. It's ongoing. We're working hard, but we can't comment publicly on it. So just a heads up. Okay, that's it. Thanks, Victoria.
All right. The first question that I have on the list here is for WMF development teams, what is the right balance between pushing own work versus seeking and supporting volunteer contributions? And it's obviously a little bit of a loaded question. Perhaps that balance has not always been right in the past. Um, I think what drives what the dev teams do inside the foundation is our annual plan. So we just spent felt forever, maybe like 3 months trying to decide what our priorities should be. And on the basis of those priorities, the teams within the foundation, certainly within technology, and I'm sure between in product as well, have come up with a set of things that they need to get done in order to serve the movement best. Um, I will say from my perspective, one thing that is different in the way that we did our planning in technology this year is that A, it's programmatic in the sense that everything that we do is a program versus a team effort. Right? So these programs tend to be aggregates of work that comes from a variety of teams, not just one team. We also have made a commitment to recognize what platforms we build, run, and operate within tech, and that will help us in figuring out what the roadmap ought to be for those platforms. Once we have this roadmap, then this is something that you can communicate, of course, to the developer community outside. And they can say, well, I agree with that, or I don't agree with that, or I would like to contribute to this or that. So it will give us a vehicle through which we can have conversations that hopefully will bring us in much more harmony with the developer community outside, and also allow us to leverage their hard work towards common objectives. And maybe Toby, you have something to add to that?
Yeah, this is a super interesting question, and I think there are kind of two examples of sort of the nature of how this works and how this might work in the future. And I think the first is sort of the sub motto of the community tech team, which is don't dash the hopes and dreams of volunteer developers, which is one of the things I like. I know in the past there's been sort of a a feeling that when the foundation gets involved in a project, the foundation sort of tries to own that project. And I think that's something, whether it's true or not, is something that we're very deliberately moving away from. One of the things that Community Tech found when they first did their wish list survey was that there were already volunteer developers working on some of these things, and some of these volunteers just needed, a little bit of technical advice, a little more resources to actually bring these things to a conclusion. And I think that the Internet Archive bot was probably the dead link bot um, was a good example of how this relationship can really work and can be the proverbial win-win for both the community, for ultimately the editors and readers, but also the technical community and the foundation. And then the other thing I wanted to call out is sort of a longer arc, and that's around some of the new readers' work where we did user research. We've talked about this a lot in other venues, but we found that offline access was really important, and we also found that there were a lot of community developers and other folks working on the offline problem, and so we've done a lot of things, at least three different things. The first is we've started working very closely with some of these offline community folks, such as QX, such as Doc James and Wikimed, and seeing how we can support each other better. Um, there have been certain products that the foundation, particularly the offline content generator that the foundation has taken upon itself to fix and replace with a better system, and then um, finally there's sort of sharing the research that we have with other folks, and I guess partnerships has also been involved, but sort of sharing the resources that we have with other folks to find places where both community and foundation offline products can actually be used, such as schools and other heavily other uh, areas without a lot of connectivity. So I think these sort of, these examples sort of illustrate, I think, different ways the foundation and the community can work together to benefit everybody.
Thank you. Um, I don't know if there are any questions on the IRC on this one. Doesn't look like it. The next question, do we have a plan to bring our developer documentation to the level of a top internet website, a major free software project? And again, if I take that first and I'll pass it on to Toby. On the technology department side, what we're actually doing this year is investing a little bit in a tech writer. Most of that effort and most of those cycles will be invested in the Wikimedia Cloud Services team, because that's where, of course, many of our volunteers, cut the teeth and also build many of their solutions. And I know it's a particular pain point. So we will be, as part of our annual plan for next year, we'll be investing in a tech writer to help us move that forward. But I know that, beyond that, there's been a lot of activity going on within the product team, especially even this past week. And I'd like to ask Toby to give us a little bit of an insight into that.
Yes, so we had a MediaWiki documentation day on Friday, which was really awesome, and we had a lot of both community and foundation um, work on documentation. So yeah, I think, between hiring professionals to help with the documentation and being more, I guess, organized and mindful about working with the community ourselves to increase the documentation, I think it's going to get better um, in the next year. As far as sort of, you know the quality of a top website, I think, the quality is pretty up and down. But I think we are, it is something that we're working on. It is something that I expect to improve in the next year.
All right. Question number 3.
There's just a
Oh,
there's just a bit of talk on IRC about the tricky situation.
in
It is the
Turkey.
tricky Turkey situation. The fact that Wikipedia and all of our sites are currently blocked in the country of Turkey.
All right. So I I see there's a question there from Rachel about why we cannot comment, and the reason why we cannot comment, as Toby said, is that there is an ongoing legal process that the foundation is part of in Turkey to try and find a resolution to this blocking of our site. So we've been advised by legal to be really careful about the remarks that we make because they may jeopardize that process. Um, all right, so if we move to the third question, this is about how volunteers can influence what we do. How can volunteers bring ideas and influence the WMF annual plans and quarterly goals? The sense being when the plans are actually published, it's kind of late. And I sympathize with that. I mean, this is the first time that I've been through the annual planning process, and certainly it's intensive. It takes a long time, and I know by the time like we were finished with it, everybody was just so happy just to put it behind us, right? So it was like, oh, this is done. Um, but it does have the side effect that it presents the community with more or less a kind of finalized artifact in some sense, right? So we've done a lot of work within the foundation and the teams to decide, what we should be working on, what matters the most this year. We had lots of, conversations about trade-offs that we had to make and so on, and then, out it comes. I do understand the need to engage the community more broadly earlier. Um, I think we will have a number of opportunities to do that. And I'm thinking specifically when it comes to the technology, the volunteer community, starting next year, of course, we will have um, a different version of the Dev Summit than we had in previous years. So in January of next year, we'll get together to talk about specifically the technology needs of the movement strategy, because by then we will have a movement strategy. And that would be, I think, an ideal opportunity for the community outside to help us figure out uh, how we should be prioritizing and what it is that they think they can do um, in collaboration with us to meet this overall kind of technology goals that we set ourselves as a result of having a strategy, a movement strategy. So that's one kind of concrete way that I think we can engage. The other way, of course, again, is through the roadmaps that we hope to build in technology. If take the MediaWiki team, right? If there's no roadmap, like if you don't know what the team is thinking about doing, how can you even influence them? Today, you can influence them somewhat through the architecture committee work, but there isn't, a stated plan that you can either contribute to or disagree with. And just by making these things public, I think we'll create a forum where people can engage with and contribute ideas, solutions, and perhaps different opinions as well. Um, and maybe Toby would like to take that as well.
Yeah, first of all, I'd like to invite people from the community to take part in the strategy process. Catherine has has shared a lot of information on Wikimedia L. We can also relay these links. We had a really cool strategy session at Wikimedia conference a couple of, or I guess last month, and it was well organized, it was well facilitated, and we got a lot of really useful input from the community, which will be woven into our strategic goals, because this is really where it begins, sort of setting these high level goals. Um, and I think this is, if there's something that you really care about, trying to map it back to a strategic goal, to a set of users, to a specific impact. This is the best way at a high level to do it, um, because we this is how we plan, right? We have specific impact in mind, and then we develop features to try to have that desired impact. Like that's how it works. I know it always hasn't been super transparent. Um, I know it hasn't always been easy to get involved, and we're really hoping that this can that these kinds of relationships and pathways can be better over the next few years. In reading, we've had, I think, more than 20 community consultations, both on the strategic side and on more around features, and we've gotten, I think, middling response. But it's been one of the things that we've been really trying to think a lot about, because generally at the sort of strategic level, the impact level, where a lot of these plans begin, we haven't gotten a lot of feedback, and that's not, it's sometimes it's just hard to think at that level when you care about it, when you care about a specific thing. The best feedback that we've gotten has been when we've been specific, like here's a specific feature, here's a specific treatment that we're interested in doing, but also proactive, also early. So being specific and early has been where we've gotten the most useful feedback. Um, and so we've been looking at what's worked and what hasn't worked in the past. We've been talking to community folks to try to figure out the exact model. But as of right now, start with strategy. Also, we've tried to, we are pretty good about publishing our draft quarterly goals. Again, we don't get the kind of feedback that I wouldn't say looking for, but we haven't gotten a lot of feedback, and sort of, understanding sort of the practical nature about how we solicit feedback, how we incorporate feedback, is important there.
Um, I guess no questions on that from the IRC. Um, so the fourth and final question that I have here is about MediaWiki. What vision do you see for MediaWiki and volunteer developers 5 years from now? Um, well, I don't really know what it will look like 5 years out, but one of the things that I was able to do, I had the opportunity to meet with some third-party MediaWiki developers and users at the Enterprise MediaWiki conference last month, I think, maybe about 6 weeks ago. Um, and one of the interesting things, the factoids that I learned there, is that actually more than half of the MediaWiki commits today happen from people outside the foundation, people that don't work here. So, it's a remarkable kind of success story of an open source project. And no matter what else happens, my hope is that 5 years out, we will still have a very vibrant open source community and a community of volunteers that help us build this, really important kind of piece of software for the movement. Um, you know, Having said that, of course, that's not gonna it's not gonna just happen without us engaging with the community of volunteers more deeply and helping understand their needs as well as the broader needs as we see them in the movement, and we'll hope to do a lot of this coordination, certainly through the roadmaps that I talked about, but also through another vehicle that we're putting together, which is a revamped version of the architecture committee. So many of you, I'm sure, had an opportunity to work with them in the past, to write RFCs, to have RFCs being reviewed and perhaps worked on and resolved by them. We are actively now working to strengthen the way that the architecture committee works and also broaden its set of kind of responsibilities. It's likely that we will rename it to the technology committee, um, because we want to have senior technical people in the foundation engage across the board on the technologies that we need to deliver on our mission, as well as what they do today, which is mostly MediaWiki. So you can expect to see an expanded scope in the architecture committee, but that will also continue to be a vehicle through which we engage the community outside. And of course, the community outside can be represented on that committee. They can be represented today, and that will not change. Um, so this is like this is an organizational, if you like, response to this question. But then there's a substantive question, which is, do we going forward continue to rely very significantly on on what is a fairly monolithic code base, or do we move more into a kind of service-oriented solution? As you all know, today we have both. We have both a pretty um, robust and substantial code base around MediaWiki, and then we also are investing in services. Um, so one of the kind of technical choices that's come down the pike for us in the next 6 months or so will be precisely that. Which way do we decide to go? What do we refactor and when and for what purposes? Um, it's something that I think would make sense for us to wait to decide on until such time as we really do have guidance from the movement strategy. But it's nonetheless one of the big questions that I, as the CTO, have on my plate to engage the community with going forward this coming year. And there are pluses and minuses, of course, in both solutions. One thing that I think it's obvious to everybody is that the kinds of services that we rely on to deliver our experience are not things that we can build ourselves, not all of them. Search being an obvious one, right? So, um, and there are many others. Machine translation is the other one. Uh, it's impossible to think of a future where we don't build a software solution to deliver a mission around that does not allow the easy incorporation of services that others build. Um, with that, maybe I'll pass it on to Toby, and we can hear his thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think I'd like it to be easier. Like I totally agree with everything that Victoria says, but I just think from a developer perspective, it should be easier. Um, it should be easier to write. It should be easier to write code. It should be easier to write services. It should be easier to deploy our to consume uh, Wikimedia services, MediaWiki services. Should be easier to test. I mean, we have a very interesting challenge in that uh, MediaWiki has a substantial third party use, substantial community development, and also supports one of the biggest websites on the planet. This is this is hard, um, and it's hard, but it's also part of the magic of this place, and it's something that we need to be mindful about continuing to support. And I think we just need to the architecture issues are critical. Um, but I think if we are to truly continue to embrace our community, we do have to make it easier to contribute to a site like Wikipedia. And I know there are people other than me who have a lot better developed ideas around this and how we might do this. But you know that's what I think. If this is something that we want, and it is, then we need to think about how we can do it a little bit better.
I couldn't agree more, right? Of course, as engineers, we don't always think, like easy comes first. Like we do stuff and then it's like, oh, it would have been nice to if we made that easy. So it's good to have voice of wisdom, like to think about creating a platform that people can easily contribute to and have easy kind of commit cycles and so on. And that's something that should definitely take into account. Um, I just happened to look behind my back here on the IRC, and there was a question about where is the data coming from regarding the number of commits. So I'll be happy to share that. I don't have it right here with me. This was given to me by the MediaWiki stakeholders group. Some of you may be aware, I think all of you are aware that there are many third-party users of the MediaWiki software, many of them involved in supporting enterprises, many of them in the government. So there is a very active group of contributors and developers. And in fact, it was them that organized this Enterprise MediaWiki conference. I asked them while I was there for this information, and this is what they produced. And like I say, I'll be happy to share that offline with you all. So, do we have any more questions? Anything that anybody wants to raise? Anything that came on the IRC while we're speaking that I didn't see?
Folks in San Francisco.
There is one question on IRC, which is that I feel as if WMF development is under advertised, and users usually have to seek it out to learn how to start volunteer development. How could this be addressed?
It's a good question. A number of options exist, but I think that the primary vehicle that we use to bring people to the cause here is through the hackathons. Um, the hackathons are first and foremost events where we make the tools and software visible and available to new developers, and also there are places where we actively support them and help them become familiar and begin to contribute. And there's of course a hackathon coming up next week. What you will typically see there is, of course, the community engagement people, in particular Kim Gill's team, whose sole, I guess, purpose is precisely to help um, empower the volunteer community, the volunteer development community. They see the hackathons as the primary tool for engaging people and empowering them. You will also see Brian Davis there, the head of our Wikimedia Cloud Services team, and Brian and his team make it a point of attending any and all hackathons they can lay their hands on, precisely to be there and be able to support new people that want to onboard. So this is a kind of a critical piece in our strategy for bringing new developers to the platform and making it a little easier, although not quite as easy as perhaps Toby would aspire to, and the rest of us would aspire to.
So if you go to Wikipedia, it's relatively, I wouldn't say super clear, but it's pretty clear that if you want to edit the site, you can. If you want to make changes to the content, you can. Um, Around December in English speaking countries, it's pretty obvious how you might contribute contribute money to Wikipedia. But it seems to me that we don't make it clear uh, that you could actually contribute to the software itself. And that also might be, an interesting thing to think about. You could even go so far as to see, like, if you are reading the article on MediaWiki, maybe we might actually show you, a way to get involved on the technical side. Um, I think we're thinking a lot about um, building our communities and broadening our communities, and the technical community is just, it's just like editors, it's just like donors in the sense that you need to reach people who might want to be involved, and you need to provide them with pathways for getting into the organization. You can do things in an offline fashion, like through the hackathons and through the editathons and other ways of becoming part of the community, but you can also do it through the through online mechanisms. And this might be something that we could think a little bit more about in the future.
So to this point, maybe if Brian is there, maybe I'll ask Brian just to comment a little bit, because now Brian has a beautiful deck that describes what Wikimedia Cloud Service is all about, and the very first slide is that we should make making a contribution to the code base as easy as writing an article. So I think he's absolutely kind of has the right set of objectives. And maybe, Brian, you can share a few thoughts about how you see that happening now with a new team. How is it going to be different? How do you think, from your point of view, we can empower people and help them make contributions in an easier way?
Sure. I mean, there's no magic answer, right? We're not flipping some switch and everything that has always been annoying is going to be better tomorrow. Um, but I think the formation of the cloud services team, which is rearranging what was called the labs team under tech ops, and the role that I previously had as kind of a tool labs developer liaison and community tech team, um, into a proper top level team in the technology department at the foundation. I think that really, you know, shows that this is making it easier to contribute technically, and specifically supporting with the compute and data service needs that developers need to make technical process on Wiki better, is something that the foundation is putting, you know, putting weight behind. It's not just idle talk. Um, in the really grand scheme of things, there's some there's a presentation that UV gave at UC Berkeley, I think, last fall, up on Commons, that people can find, that talks about democratizing programming by bringing the wiki way to software development. And I think in the really, really long term, those are the things that we're excited about. Working on tools like Quarry and Pause that get rid of a lot of the technical complexity. You don't need SSH keys, and you don't need to know, hopefully, a whole lot about how the Unix command line works, and instead bringing, you know, some nice web-based software to bear, where people can just get to the meat of the problems that they want to solve, which is digging through the data and finding the important bits and putting that back to work on the wikis.
Yeah, I think Brian also has some really good ideas about building communities around specific pieces of functionality. It may be hard to contribute. It may be harder to contribute to MediaWiki, harder than it was 10 years ago. But there's lots of other software that runs Wikipedia. Lots of bots, for example, and lots of services uh, that those bots can leverage that might be an easier path to becoming a MediaWiki developer. Sati. Plenty of mics.
So many mics. This might be a silly question, and I wasn't here for the first part, so feel free to tell me that you already answered this. As I listened to what you were saying, just for the half that I was here for, it struck me that I actually don't know what you mean when you say the community. Like, sometimes I understand you're talking about those who are like a technical developer who wants to contribute to MediaWiki. You, Victoria, were talking about the people who are actually using MediaWiki platform to run their own instances. I think now Brian was kind of talking about people who may not want to contribute to MediaWiki but have other skills that they can perhaps contribute in the future. There's obviously editors, there's obviously readers. It seems like the scope of your community is really broad. And so I'm wondering, I guess the first part of my question is, so when you say the community, what are you really referring to? And then the second part is that when you talk about community engagement, right, whether that's on annual plan or feature rollout or product design, like, how do you engage with this pretty diverse and expansive set of people?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right, and the community that we address here is indeed very diverse and has different objectives. I would say that when I say community, like when I came to this meeting, I wasn't thinking about editors. I wasn't thinking about contributors. I wasn't thinking about people that use the end product of our work. I was thinking about the people that power the engine that delivers that work. And those people, are, of course, are some of them inside the foundation, some of them are outside the foundation, making individual contributions, perhaps to MediaWiki, perhaps to other pieces of code that we have. There could be people that use instances, as you say, and even though that might appear to be not particularly related to what we do, matter of fact, it is, because oftentimes they take features that we build and they exercise them to scale. So they do a great deal of testing for us that we couldn't possibly do inside. So it's all part of a kind of flywheel, if you like. There are also people, as you point out, that come to us because they have other projects that they want to work on. So they come to labs, for example, where we give them many resources to build out their ideas. We give them access to data, which is gold for them. So why do we do that? Well, we do that because being part of an open source community for us is fundamental in the way that we see how the foundation builds and delivers on its mission. So it could be that somebody who comes today in cloud services and builds a bot that they use for something else and becomes familiar with the tools and what we do, tomorrow might be a volunteer that will come in and build a feature for us that we might really need in a project somewhere else. So we have a pretty kind of pluralistic view about how all this, how this community comes together. I think your second question is also a question that came from the folks in the community. I don't think there's a perfect way for us to do that, given how diverse it is. But some of the things that we can do are, for example, liaise with special interest groups. So if you take the MediaWiki stakeholders group, they're the people that do enterprise uses. So they have one point of view. They can come to us with a set of things that they want, and we may say, well, these two things we can do because they're consistent with what the broader community needs. These other things we cannot do. It gives us a pathway to have these conversations. We couldn't have that discussion even without having a roadmap of our own, so that because like if you don't know where you're going, one thing is for sure, all roads will take you there. And I think just by like putting a stake in the ground, we can now have some negotiations and some conversations around what works, what fits, what doesn't fit. Toby, any ideas?
Yeah, I think in general we are becoming far more mindful about this term, the community, which, as Victoria said, it's a nebulous term, and if you write a bot that fixes grammar mistakes on the projects, are you part of the technical community? Are you part of the editor community? Are you part of both? But these are interesting. These are super interesting problems, and I think that part of why it's fun to work here. But for product we worked with, we had a project to try to understand our audiences better, and I think there are a few posters around, and I think you've seen it. It was in our annual plan. And I think this is the first step. Like Victoria pointed out, this is the first step. Like, let's just figure out what the various audiences are, and then the next step is to start figuring out, okay, which are the most important this year, which are the most important next year, what are the particular strategies that we can use to reach those audiences and to grow those audiences. So hopefully that answers that. That it's a little bit more color around the second of your questions, but to the first, it's primarily the technical community that I feel, but even within the technical community, there are various facets, and and just to sort of wax a little more poetically here, like sort of the fact that there's a huge research community around Wikipedia is awesome. The fact that there is a huge, developer community, like these are great and hopeful things. And but there are sort of basic rules about building these communities that we can use to encourage their growth.
I mean, also, I think it's kind of great because in some cases we have experience with kind of methods that work. In this particular case, we have kind of a great success, I think, in community tech, where I know for a long time there was a kind of great deal of anxiety about how do we listen to the community, how to prioritize what they have to say. The community tech team has done a spectacular job in collecting these ideas and working with the community to prioritize and then begin delivering on them. One of the ideas that was floated at Dev Summit back in January was to create a developer wish list. And this is something that I think makes a ton of sense. And it's something that, hopefully we can also put in, into action and hopefully emulate the success that the community tech team has seen so far. That could be a very direct way of influencing features and so on. It's something that Kim's team is thinking about in community engagement, and it's something that we would definitely be more than happy to support in both in tech and product, I'm sure.
There's one question. In the long term, does WMF try to absorb parts of the community into itself, or does it benefit WMF to leave the community as is?
There's Here's an interesting book called "Good to Great in the Social Sector," and it's only like 25 pages. Yeah, and it's definitely worth it. I mean, it's a business book for sure, but I think one of the most interesting parts of it is it sort of takes like commonly held sort of business practices and applies them to nonprofit or community oriented organizations. And I think one of the most interesting metaphors in this book was um, helping see the WMF not at the top of a hierarchy, but at the center. And so I would like to see moving forward much more cooperation between the WMF and these community institutions, whether they be chapters, whether they be individual developers, whether they be events, and really try to figure out how we can work together to benefit the project in general. New readers in our work with QX and Wikimed, I think we're starting to see some ways of how this can work. Community tech, Brian's work with labs, just in general work with developers. But I really feel like we want to make the whole greater than the sum of the parts by working together.
Couldn't agree more. So I haven't read the book, and I should read the book, especially since 25 pages. I can do that. But I just want to quote, I think it was Bill Gates who said, it doesn't matter how many smart people you have inside your organization, there are always going to be many more smarter people outside. And that is true for companies. It certainly is true for the movement. I mean, in my mind, and I think, historically the foundation has been an enabler for the community. Without the community, both, of contributors and, developers, I don't think the foundation would have been anywhere near as successful as it has been in bringing knowledge to people. So in my mind, it's like it's absolutely essential. If we lose, touch or the support of community, both on the contribution side and the kind of developer side, I don't think we will succeed in our objective. So for us, maintaining and empowering that community is absolutely vital. I mean, of that I have no doubt. And I think you will see that also reflected in the movement strategy directions that are already emerging. Having a healthy, vibrant, well-connected community to the mission is absolutely essential, I think, for our success. Any other questions from the room? Doesn't seem to be anything on the IRC unless you see something. If not, maybe we'll take a bow. We'll thank you all for.
Maybe you all should take a bow.
Thank you for joining us, and we'll continue this conversation. What I would like to do, and we'll continue working with Kim's team and community engagement, is to keep the conversation, the dialogue open. This is just one of the tools that we have. I would like to have a perpetual kind of list of questions, matter of fact, and then answer the ones that are most popular or like the most prominent in people's minds on a regular cadence. It took us a little while, like, to get to this point. I mean, it was January when we did the last one. Today is, I guess, May. I'd like to do them maybe like every 2 months, just to be, a bit more responsive. Something for us to work towards. The more frequent I think we make these exchanges, the better off we're going to be in terms of both alignment, communication, and success at the end of the day. So with that, thank you all, both here and those of you remotely watching and listening, both now and in the future. Thank you all.
Thank you.